The road surrendered to heather and stone as the sky bruised toward evening, and the manor rose from the moor like a shipwrecked cathedral. The driver would not cross the outer gate. He only muttered that some doors deserve their dust. Alone in the wind, I found the iron key, cold as a coin from the underworld. Inside, the air smelled of old rain and portraits that had forgotten their subjects. Floors sighed under my step, as if the house resented waking. A bell note rang somewhere distant, though I saw no bell. And a draft carried a whisper that could have been a prayer or a warning. By the time I lit the first lantern, the light felt small and the corridors long with their locked mouths of doors. From the west wing came 3 soft knocks, spaced like a patient heartbeat. I told myself it was the boards settling, yet I kept the lantern close and the key closer, and dared not ask which door had answered me. Morning arrived colorless, as if the sun feared to trespass. I made the rounds with a ledger and a broom, pretending a routine could pin the place to reason. In the kitchens lay copper pans bright as coins, though no fire had licked them in years. Footsteps echoed in rooms I had not entered, but they kept just far enough to remain a question. In the library, a draft rifled pages as though a patient reader resumed an interrupted chapter. I spoke aloud to test the silence, and the silence answered by listening harder. From the north corridor came the thin chime of glass, a note too delicate to be an accident. When I reached the window, breath lingered on the pane in a shape not my own. I cleaned it with my sleeve and laughed softly at myself, yet the sleeve dried slower than it should have, and the ledger ink, newly written, had blurred into a word I did not write. By noon, I sought counsel in the small chapel, not for piety but for steadiness. The old traveler with the mantle of faith arrived as if summoned by the house itself, saying roads close behind him when a place requires prayer. He circled the nave with careful steps, naming the bones of the building, then stopped where the mortar had darkened in a circle like a tide mark. He warned that blessings do not change what a house remembers. They only teach it to speak. I told him of the knocks, and he listened the way a physician listens to a cough, measuring the spaces between. 3, he murmured. 3 asks to be answered. When he raised a hand, the candles gave a tremor though they were unlit. I felt the floor tilt, not in motion but in loyalty, as if the heart of the mansion had turned and given us its attention. In the drawing room, the keeper of the keys of blood met me by the shuttered light. She spoke of inventories and roofs, of wages and wells, as though sensible accounts could muffle the West Wing's breath. Yet between each practical word, there was a pause where grief sat like a hidden blade. She said one corridor had been sealed for the safety of all and the comfort of none, and if I valued my sleep, I would honor the chains. I replied that sleep had not asked my permission for years. Her mouth almost became a smile, and then thought better of it. From beyond the door, the wind rose into a note that nearly resolved into a voice and failed. She drew the veil closer and said, "The house is most dangerous when it tries to be kind." I found myself nodding, lantern low, as if any taller light would offend whatever listened. Night returned with the confidence of an old habit. I walked the perimeter, counting heartbeats between each pool of light. The rain had found its echo in the gutters, and the house answered with pipes like distant flutes. By the time I reached the boundary no one spoke of, the air was cooler by a breath, and the boards exhaled tar-sweet damp. I set the lantern on the floor and pressed my palm to the chain, expecting chill. The metal was warm. A whisper rose from the seam, neither plea nor threat, just a presence practicing the shape of words. I said, as gently as one speaks to a fevered child, that I would return in the morning with tools and with courage. The seam breathed once, and the lantern flame bent toward it as if in greeting. Then, from somewhere behind me where there was only stone, someone knocked 3 times, slower than before. The rain did not stop, but changed its rhythm. Less storm, more whisper. Morning found the mansion shrouded in mist that turned the courtyard statues into mourners. I began my rounds with the lantern still burning, unwilling to test the dimness without it. The silence was thicker now, as if the air waited for a decision I hadn't made. In the west corridor, a smell of cold metal drifted from beneath the chained door, though the iron hadn't been disturbed. On a whim or a need, I pressed my ear to the boards. A single voice, not word, not sound, just a vibration of presence, deep and low, like the breath of the sea trapped behind stone. Yet, I could not shake the sense that the house had begun to breathe in time with me. Later in the library, the old cleric returned, his robes damp and his patience shorter than before. He claimed the chapel walls murmured during his prayers. Some prayers echo backward, he said, and bring with them answers you do not want. I asked him what the house confessed. Nothing, he replied, but it listens well. Together we traced the pattern of the hallways, noting how every corridor led, in its crooked way, back toward the sealed wing. No drafts explained the cold. No nails explained the weeping of the plaster. When the bell in the tower rang once by itself, we both turned toward the sound. But the rope hung still. The air between us felt like the pause in a dying heartbeat. Too late to help, too early to mourn. The young servant girl found me in the gallery, broom forgotten, her face pale from what she called the knocking behind the wall. She led me to the servants' quarters, where plaster dust had fallen in a neat circle on the floor. No hole above, no crack, just the outline of something invisible pressing outward. I told her it was rats, though her eyes saw through the lie. She said she dreamed of a woman behind the boards, weeping without tears. I sent her away with tasks, but as she turned, the dust rose gently from the floor, swirling like breath. I stood in the settling silence, counting the beats of my heart, and wondered when the living began to move like ghosts, and the ghosts like us. At dusk, Lady Saren summoned me to the drawing room. The fire had been lit, though I could not remember hearing the servants at work. She spoke in a tone softer than prayer and more binding than law. The West Wing, she said, was not cursed but burdened. A promise had been broken there long before she was born, and such promises rot slowly. When she asked whether I had heard the knocks again, I lied. Her eyes did not accuse, but understood. She poured wine black as ink, and when she drank, a tremor moved through her hand. If you must listen, she said, then do so with mercy. What is trapped there once kept us safe. I wanted to ask from what, but she had already looked away toward the sealed corridor, as though expecting an answer herself. Night fell without stars. The house whispered like a man talking in his sleep, disjointed, full of half-remembered pain. I returned to the sealed hall, drawn not by bravery, but by the need to prove fear could be mastered by will. The chain gleamed faintly with moisture, though the air was dry. From somewhere behind the boards came a sound like fabric brushing against stone. I whispered a name not my own, and the silence deepened, eager, almost answering. The lantern's flame tilted, stretching toward the door as though pulled. Then the boards shuddered once, an inward breath, and went still. My heart felt counted by something other than time. I left the lantern there when I walked away, burning low, guarding nothing but the dark. Arch, to she. By the third morning, sunlight came as rumor only, its warmth unable to pierce the glass. The air was colder, but alive. Every wall carried a faint heartbeat. Every step echoed too long. I found Father Ronan in the chapel, whispering verses that belonged more to fear than to faith. He confessed that the West Wing's silence had entered his dreams. A woman's voice had begun to plead for forgiveness, yet he could not tell whose sin she named. I told him of the marks spreading on the plaster, dark like ink spilled through the wall's veins. He raised a trembling hand and said, "It listens for confession." Then his candle died, though no wind stirred. I realized the mansion did not need mouths to speak. It borrowed ours when it wished to be heard. The library had become restless. Books fell without touch. Pages turned with purpose. When I lit the lantern, the flame bent toward one shelf, where dust had been swept in a deliberate circle. Beneath it lay a leather-bound journal too new for this place. The script inside was neither elegant nor rushed. It was desperate. It spoke of an ancestor who bargained with the dark for the safety of Ironwald's blood, sealing what she summoned within the West Chamber. Her promise to keep it contained forever. Her punishment to remain near. The ink ended mid-sentence, blotted as if the hand that wrote it had vanished mid-word. When I turned the page, I saw my own name written there, though I had never held that pen. Lady Saren appeared as dusk bled through the windows, her veil gone, her eyes rimmed in sleepless red. She said she, too, had heard her ancestor's name spoken in the dark, the syllables drawn out like someone learning to speak again. She confessed the West Wing had been her family's shrine, and every heir swore never to open it lest the vow unravel. I asked her why she remained if she feared it so. "Because someone must remember what we are," she said. Then, quieter, "and what we became." When she left, I noticed the faintest trace of ash on her fingertips, as though she had touched fire that had long gone cold. That night, Mara returned, pale but determined. She carried a scrap of paper she said had been slipped under her door. On it, only a single sentence in an elegant, archaic hand. The caretaker must answer. I demanded who had given it to her, but she only shook her head. She dreamed, she said, of corridors turning into oceans, and of voices beneath them singing her name. I told her to leave the mansion at first light. She smiled as though she pitied me. When she vanished back into the servants' stairs, her shadow lingered an instant too long, detached, as if it had chosen to stay behind. When sleep finally took me, it was not rest but summons. I walked through the west corridor unbound by locks, guided by a sound like slow breathing through water. The chains were gone, the boards smooth as skin. A door waited where before there had been only wall. From within, light pulsed as if from a heart too large for its cage. I reached for the handle and felt another hand already there. Cold, smaller, and desperate. It was not holding me back. It was asking to be remembered. When I woke at my desk, dawn was gray. My hand bore a smudge of soot shaped like a fingerprint, and the door, though sealed, now wept a steady tear of black water. The next morning, the house no longer pretended to be asleep. Doors whispered as I passed, and the chandeliers swayed, though no draft stirred them. Mara's chamber was empty. The bed unslept in, her shawl folded neatly at the foot. A faint, wet footprint led toward the west wing and vanished at the first turn. I called her name until it became a stranger's sound. In the silence that followed, the walls began to pulse like lungs taking shallow breaths. From within the sealed corridor came a sigh long and low, as though the house itself lamented what it had consumed. I ran to the chapel, but even Father Ronan's prayers had turned to muters that sounded like bargaining. Father Ronan met me in the chapel doorway, face drawn as parchment, eyes red from sleepless night. He said the girl had crossed a boundary. She was never meant to know. I demanded help, but he spoke instead of atonement. That the presence was older than faith, older than names. He raised his crucifix, and for a heartbeat the light through the window bent toward it. Then the glass shattered inward, shards ringing like 1,000 bells. Blood traced his palm where he had clutched the symbol too tightly. "It seeks witness," he said. "It will not be unseen." When I found Lady Saren in the drawing room, the fire was out, though the hearth glowed faintly from within. She stood barefoot before it, speaking to the flames in a tongue that sounded like the echo of water in a tomb. I begged her to leave, but she smiled through tears and said she had seen Mara beyond the door. Safe, she insisted, just waiting. The air thickened with ash that moved as if alive. Her shadow writhed against the wall, separate, larger, crowned with the shape of horns. When she finished whispering, the last coal died, and darkness stood upright between us, listening. The west wing chains had ruptured. Iron links lay scattered like dead serpents, boards warped outward as if the door had exhaled. A warm wind rolled from the gap, carrying whispers that felt like fingertips brushing my mind. I entered, lantern high. The corridor within was not ruin but remembrance. Portraits intact, candles burning though no hand had lit them. At its end, a mirror waited, taller than any door. In its surface, I saw the room not as it was, but as it had been. Mara alive, kneeling, speaking to something unseen with reverence. Her eyes were not her own. They belonged to the shadow that stood behind me. Father Ronan came running at the sound of shattering glass, clutching his cross, shouting a litany I no longer recognized. The candles flared blue. The walls bled dark water, and the mirror cracked down its heart like a scream frozen in silver. Saren's voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere, pleading for the promise to end. I seized a fallen candelabrum and struck the frame. The sound it made was like striking bone. Light burst outward, and for an instant I saw them all. Mara, Saren, the old cleric, and the shadow's many faces, before the blast flung me back into the hall. When I opened my eyes, the door was sealed once more, but the chain was gone, melted into the stone. Silence followed the shattering, a silence too complete to trust. Smoke curled from the cracked walls, forming faces that dissolved before recognition. When I rose, the corridor was changed, younger somehow, as though time itself had been rewound by sorrow. Father Ronan knelt nearby, blood at his temple, whispering that the presence had been loosed only partly, neither confined nor free. I saw movement in the air like water bending light. It drifted toward me and stopped, uncertain, as if expecting a command. Then a voice, not cruel, but pleading, spoke within my chest. Keep the promise. The meaning of the words was both prayer and threat. And I understood. Whatever curse had bound this house, I was now part of its vow. In the drawing room, I found Lady Saren seated before the dead hearth, her posture regal despite exhaustion. She spoke calmly, as if the end had been decided long ago. The spirit, she explained, was her ancestor's shadow, once human, then condemned by love twisted into sorcery. It had saved the iron-walled line from ruin, but demanded remembrance in return. Each generation's heir must keep the secret sealed and feed the memory through prayer or pain. But we forgot, she said. We built walls instead of altars. She turned her gaze to me, almost tender. It called you because you still remember how to grieve. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine, and for an instant the air between us thickened, shimmering like tears, made solid. Father Ronan returned with holy oil, muttering a blessing half in Latin, half in fear. He drew a circle on the floor and bade me stand within. Saren stood beyond it, eyes hollow with knowing. The cleric began to chant, and the air thickened until sound felt like weight. From the ceiling dripped black water, forming shapes, faces, arms, forgotten memories reaching for warmth. When the presence answered, its voice came through every mouth at once. It did not roar. It wept. Release me, it said. I remember their promise. The oil flared into light, and the old man screamed a prayer too ancient to survive him. When the flame died, only two of us remained conscious, and the circle glowed from beneath our feet. like a heartbeat still waiting to stop. When the smoke thinned, I realized Father Ronan was gone. His rosary melted into the floor. The presence hovered near Saren, its edges flickering like candle flame caught in wind. She spoke softly. "It will not harm us. It only wants to be known." But her eyes glistened, and the shadow turned toward me with hunger, disguised as devotion. I felt its sorrow flood my chest, its memories pressing into mine. Centuries of silence, of vows unmet. It showed me Mara walking the corridors, untouched by time, part of its dream now. To break the curse, the spirit required a vessel, not to destroy, but to remember. Saren whispered that every house must choose its caretaker. I understood then who it wanted. The choice was no longer mine. It had been written when I first set foot on the moor. I knelt before the spirit, and it touched my brow with fingers of cold fire. Memories not my own flooded in. The rise of Ironwald, the betrayal, the sealing, the centuries of watchful grief. Saren whispered my name once, her voice both blessing and farewell. The presence entered like breath, drawn deep. Pain became clarity. I felt walls, stones, timbers, all alive through me. I was caretaker no longer. I was the mansion remembering itself. As dawn broke through shattered glass, Saren stood alone before the door that had once sealed the curse. "Rest," she said, though I could no longer answer except through the sigh of wind that moved the curtains. The first hours of my new breath were not my own. I felt the mansion's bones through every heartbeat. The timbers flexed with mine. The air inhaled when I did. Lady Saren moved through the halls as if walking inside a memory that had learned to love her. The presence whispered in my thoughts, its voice layered with centuries. "You will hold what they feared to keep." Through my eyes it watched her, not with hunger now, but with grief. Each lantern flicker traced the house's veins, showing scenes of lives long extinguished. Children laughing in dust, servants dancing between shadows, all of it alive again within me. Yet beneath the calm ran a tremor. Something unresolved, the promise still bleeding through the stones. Saren led me to the courtyard, where dawn pooled like pale gold in the puddles. Statues once corroded now gleamed as if washed by unseen hands. She asked if I could hear them, the souls that had lived, served, and died here. I nodded. They murmured within me like 1,000 quiet rivers. She fell to her knees, whispering apologies to ancestors I now carried. The presence inside me stirred gently, neither angered nor appeased. It asked that she forgive herself. And through my mouth the words came, heavy with voices not my own. Her tears struck the stones, each drop leaving a faint pulse of light before fading. In that fragile morning, grief became confession, and confession almost became peace. By nightfall, the walls began to hum, a slow, steady resonance like breath over glass. Father Ronan's voice echoed faintly within that sound, not in agony, but in prayer renewed. The presence revealed what still chained it, a final memory locked beneath the chapel floor. Saren and I lifted the cracked stones together. Beneath lay a relic. A fragment of mirror, its surface black and breathing. When my hand touched it, the spirit surged, flooding me with the last vision of its mortal self. A woman sealing her soul behind glass to save her bloodline. Her face was Saren's own, unmarred by time. The mirror whispered, "Return." And I knew the only way to free her was to finish what she began. To bear the memory entirely, to let her reflection rest in me. The spirit's strength poured into me, memory by memory, until the house no longer separated from flesh. Walls pulsed with heartbeat, floors shimmered with veins of light. Saren's voice broke through the storm of visions, calling me back to myself. "Aldrich," she said, "you have done enough." But the presence answered for me. He must remember, or I will remain. I felt my body flicker between man and shadow, between will and echo. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me, and whispered a single word. Rest. Her voice became an anchor in the torrent. Slowly, the visions receded. For the first time in centuries, the house grew still. When the light finally dimmed, I stood alone. Saren lay upon the floor, her breathing steady, freed from the lineage's burden. The mansion was quiet, alive but calm, every beam humming with gentle memory. The presence spoke one last time inside my mind. Now you are keeper, not prisoner. I walked through every corridor until dawn touched the windows, and the reflections held only peace. From beyond the moor, the bells of a distant village rang, and the sound did not echo. It was answered. The house exhaled a final sigh, and I felt myself fade into its walls, content, eternal. A caretaker at last. Dawn broke clear for the first time in memory. The moor, once cloaked in fog, shone wet and golden beneath the rising sun. Birds dared to sing again. From within the manor, light drifted through unshuttered windows like hesitant grace. Lady Saren woke upon the drawing room floor to the faint hum of warmth moving through stone, the heartbeat of a house reborn. She called my name, and the echo came not from air but from everywhere at once, a deep and gentle voice that asked nothing. She rose unsteadily and walked the corridors where I had once carried the lantern. Each door stood open, each portrait at peace. In every room the dust had settled in patterns like script, forming one word only: remember. Outside, the gardens had awakened. Dew clung to the roses that had long refused to bloom. Their scent carried on the mild wind. Saren stepped barefoot across the grass, her shadow now light and human again. She whispered gratitude to the air, and somewhere deep within the manor, timber answered with a soft creak. The sound of ascent. The presence was gone, but not lost. It lived quietly within the stone and within her memories. The curse had never been destruction, only forgetting, and now remembrance had saved them both. The house was free because someone had stayed to love it in silence. At the chapel, Saren found Father Ronan's rosary, its beads fused together in a single tear of glass. She placed it upon the altar and knelt, her prayer not for salvation but remembrance. The air shimmered faintly, and a single bell tolled without rope or wind. In that sound, she heard all the voices that had once filled these halls. Servants, children, ancestors, joined now in harmony. When the echo faded, she smiled through tears. No one needed to guard the mansion anymore. It would guard itself, and her, until both were forgotten by the living and cherished by time. As day waned, Saren stood on the balcony overlooking the moor. The wind carried the scent of rain, but no storm followed. She spoke softly into the horizon, promising to keep the manor alive, to welcome those who sought refuge and peace. Within her words, a whisper answered, my whisper, soft as turning pages. You are not alone, it said. She smiled, knowing I would hear through the creak of stair, through the lantern's flicker, through the quiet settling of evening. The house, once haunted, now hummed with contentment, its memory whole. Night came gently to Ironwald. The moon crowned the manor in silver, and the windows glowed faintly, one by one, as though greeting unseen guests. Saren closed her eyes and rested by the fire, her breathing matching the rhythm of the house. Beneath the stones, I dreamed. The caretaker and the kept, memory made flesh and ash. The presence was no longer bound. It was a hymn of remembrance, sung through my endless watch. Beyond the moor, travelers still whispered of the forgotten mansion and its lonely keeper, never knowing they were already part of its story. For those who remember, No soul is ever truly gone.